particular, especially against the 207. The other fans are in the front and rear of this case. The Flux Pro also has a simple digital display on the side that reports GPU and CPU temperature, similar to what we've seen on some of the older EVGA cases in the past. Drive support is two 2.5-inch SSDs, and another set of 4 total slots for 3.5 or 2.5-inch drives. The company also had a non-pro smaller Flux, which ditches the display and reduces fan count to a still high 5 fans, and that's just for what's included. The non-pro is 70 to 80% new tooling, and otherwise reuses some of Antec's existing tooling. Antec plans to sell the non-pro Flux for $110 to $120 in July or August, depending on shipping timelines. And finally, they had a C8 with alternate wood or aluminum panels. Feels sort of similar to the 6500 approach from Corsair, and our C8 review is in the works now. They also had a C7. We didn't really care for this one, so no time spent on it. And we'll also talk about Antec's ITX case later in this video. Montec had a massive showing at Computex and seems to be taking a swarm strategy to cases. We have two we'll focus on, but the quick run through is this. The company had its new ultra budget case, the XR, at $64 with 3 fans, and it's a fish tank style. It also had an XR Mesh, $70 for 4 fans on that one. And they also showed the new King 65 Pro chassis, which is a cheaper King 95 of similar size. Then there was the King 95 Mega Pro, which plans to hit the $200 mark with 7 fans included, while also bearing a name that belongs in Quake 3. Montec had prototypes as well, like its Sky 3 with dual sunken 80mm fans and its HSO1 case, accompanied by the HSO1 purse, which not all ideas are winners. We'll shift focus to the XR first. The Montec XR case comes in either a glass fish tank style with 3 fans or a mesh panel style with a wood embellishment that has 4 fans, and the latter is called the XR Mesh. The fish tank is $64. The mesh is $70. The XR fish tank includes 2 120mm reverse side fans and 1 120mm back fan, all ARGB. The tooling is somewhat repurposed. Montec says it took its Sky 2 tooling and scaled it. The mesh variant has 3 120mm fans at the front, 1 120 in the rear, with a wood plate that feels somewhat thrown on just to meet the trend, but it at least doesn't look bad. The interior chassis is incredibly plain and has no ease of installation features that are particularly strong. It's basic. The strength of the case is brute force air movement as cheap as possible, which has been an underserved market for the last few years. The XR just released, and we plan on buying one to review as soon as our schedule clears. Moving to the King 65 Pro, this case will ship in September for $90 and includes 3 fans, sized at 2 reverse 140s and 1 120 rear. The King 65 Pro makes use of the dual chamber tooling of the King 95, but reduces cost by eliminating the curved glass, sticking to just a 90-degree intersection, and changing the top panel design to be a simple circular mesh. We have a whole video on these and other Montec cases from Computex, so we'll link that below if you want to see it. The Fantex G400A finally brings a successor to the Fantex P400A Digital that we really liked years ago. For those who don't remember, Fantex used to be dead set on completely obstructed panels like the P400 Non-A that we could just never recommend. The P400A Digital, though, completely overhauled this with mesh panels and a high fan count that resulted in a regular recommendation in our roundups for affordable cases. It's been years since the P400A launched, so it's due for a replacement, and the G400A is meant to be that replacement. The case will be $100 and includes 4 140mm fans with 3 in the front and 1 in the rear as exhaust. The case will mostly use new tooling, with the exception of a few parts shared with other cases. The G400N variant will be $130 instead and ships with a controller hub, dual glass side panels rather than one, and a cable comb cover, but both cases get the cable management guide. Both cases released in Q3 this year. We should have a review up for the G400A when it's ready. Fantex also had a workstation variant of its Enthuse series of cases, some refreshed NV series cases with back-to-back support now, and its new Evolve X2 prototype fish tank, and it hopes to sell for around $150, which would make it pretty competitive in that market. Other Fantex products included 3 interconnecting fans in a pack intended to sell for $30, which would make them some of the cheapest interconnecting fans on the market, but they also had an Arctic competitor liquid cooler that would use those fans. We'll talk about the cooler in a future review and maybe in our next cooler roundup as well. Back to the cases though, the Evolve X2 would be promising if it can hit the price of $150. The prototype uses aluminum for the interior shroud, which would definitely make it expensive, but looks good. We'll switch it up with Silverstone. Silverstone had some normal cases that'll be G400A competitors later. It had a cheap XR competitor, also at about $60, and then some absolute mammoths of stature and design, and price. The Alta D1 is one of those. The D1 was shown last year, but finalized this year. The case is a brilliant showcase of mechanical design with fully modular cages and mounts. Each modular cage can be rotated 90 degrees to either install the cages vertically side by side or stack atop one another. These cages can be used for optical drives, hard drives, including those externally accessible with hotspot backplanes, radiators that slot in across the top of the case and take the spot of 2 drive modules, or fans, including up to 2 180mm fans at the bottom of the front and room for one 160mm fan up top in the front. The motherboard tray is also completely removable to form an instant test bench or be assembled externally. The Alta D1 is a taller form factor tower that's big enough to need a cross brace across the center of the chassis for stability. Silverstone doubles this as a mount for vertical GPU support brackets, and the D1 uses a thick aluminum for some of the panels like the top, and uses a split rear side panel for better structural support, but definitely also just cost. The front panel is hinged and has a keyed latch. There's a lot of other small mechanical features as well. But the D1 will launch soon. It has an unknown price right now, but Silverstone openly told us that it'll be high. We were told to expect it to be closer to $1,000 than not, despite its inevitably low viability for most people and its very high price. We wanted to highlight it for doing something unique while remaining functional. Actually, the unique part is the function in this one. Silverstone had a number of other cases of varying affordability as well. You can check out our dedicated video for some of those, but we'll give a quick recap here. For the more normal cases, the Farah 514X will be $100 and includes 4 120mm ARGB fans at the hub. It uses a chamfered front panel for structural support of the mesh and for enough fan clearance to support fans on the inside and the outside of the chassis, but still within the front panel. The Seta H2M is a micro ATX variation of the same theme while still fitting 2 360mm radiators. The 515XR is a shorter case in depth while retaining normal height, giving it an older feel. The 515XR is meant for the Japanese market, where space for desktop computers is reduced. Silverstone is considering it for the rest of the world if there's enough of a positive response for it, but it wants people to know that it won't have the depth to fit the longest video cards. The case should be $50 to $60, while still somehow including 4 120mm fans. As a final note, Silverstone also had a new HEPC chassis and 5U form factor called the CW04 or Crown 04. The new Alta T1 is also a spiritual successor to the TJ07 from 2006, using an extruded aluminum panel on the front, top, bottom, and some of the back. Here's a new CS383 that made an appearance as a home server or NAS box, priced at $400, and we think Silverstone showing this year illustrates a lot of variety and function-first designs. That's why we wanted to highlight them, because it's just so different. As much as we like the budget-friendly airflow cases, it's cool to see some differences in the market. Cooler Master is also back this year. It's been a long time since Cooler Master turned around its case design by departing from the H500P and moving to the H500P mesh. We strongly recommended the H500P mesh and later the H500M and actually the Cooler Master TD500 as a result of Cooler Master's significant improvements in its design. Since then, though, they haven't had as much exciting stuff because a lot of their cases got kind of smashed by the tax and tariff changes, which eliminated them from the markets. We found Cooler Master's new ITX cases the most mechanically interesting, but the new Masterbox 500 and Encore 600 revive its ATX side. The Encore 600 will fight in the now burgeoning $180 to $220 market. The Prestige model is $210 and will include 2 glass panels and 1 mesh panel. The glass and mesh are symmetrical with each other and can be swapped between sides and the front, as this modular fish tank style exposes basically 2.5 panels. The panels each pop out individually and relatively easily for the same reason as deep-wide side base. It's simple invertibility because there's a total of 6 screws that allow this case to flip upside down and present the system to the other side. This is a massive improvement on Cooler Master's flawed prior invertible cases. Neither of the Encore 600 models include fans, and both models use an angled fan tray to help direct air towards components while also looking different. This is going to be a new trend with some of these cases based on what we saw this year. The standard edition will be $180 and includes just 1 glass and 1 mesh panel, but is otherwise mostly identical. The Master Box is a relatively uneventful case in that it matches other cases in its price point. The box will be $140 for the glass variant and $120 for mesh, and both include a rear 120mm ARGB fan, and the mesh includes 3 additional 120mm ARGB fans, totaling 4. The cases share the same tooling, and Cooler Master intends for the LED side panel to be customizable, so the angsty LED lettering should be swappable to other pixel-based designs and software. We'll change things up again. Thermaltake had a ton at its booth this year, but we wanted to highlight what's technically an older case, sort of. The Thermaltake W100 case had its tooling refreshed for the new AX700 workstation case, which is this one. The case is an absolute monster, and it remembers why big cases exist. Rather than a big empty glass cube, Thermaltake still includes a lot of drive cages. The show build had space for 12 hard drives mounted to the vertical rail, but another 2 drives could be mounted without the radiator in the way. And the backside motherboard tray would support at least another 2 drives from what we could see with the sort of lockdown system at the show. The large panel doors have latches to secure closed and use foam pads for a better seal, showing more attention to detail in some areas. The AX700 has a TBD price and will probably launch in Q4. It's not final yet. Since this is technically a refresh of an existing case, we'll move on to the next one quickly, which is Corsair's 9000D, another refresh on tooling. This one builds on the 1000D case, but has about 30% new tooling, according to Corsair. The show build had about 32 fans installed and 2 systems, one ITX and one ATX, but doesn't focus on the functional storage afforded by the AX700 as much. This is another one where we liked the really small attention to detail, like pre-greased rails for the fan trays and actuation for the fan and radiator trays that actually works really nicely. It also has small fan-sized markings on the rails that makes installation clearer, reviving the 1000D highlights of the back. Corsair doesn't reach Silverstone levels of pure mechanical functionality and quality of life features in the huge case, but it comes in a lot cheaper. Still not cheap. It'll be around $500, but a lot cheaper than Silverstone D1. Corsair had 2 cases on show this year, and we didn't like the 3500X that much, but it's another fish tank case, and it'll fight in that $100-ish arena. Our next entry in the ATX category is the Luca. This is from the brand new company Trikes, which made its public debut just this year and launched its Panorama liquid cooler. Trikes, and that is how you say it for some reason, is founded by defectors from Asus and Cooler Master and is supported by Asetek. The Trikes Luca is intended to be $200 for the glass model and $220 for the unit that includes 2 200mm by 38mm fans with a hinged door mesh front panel. While it has some oversights that we talked about in the standalone video, like the restrictive airflow design on the bottom foot, its heavy use of aluminum paneling and futuristic styling gets it on the map. Plus, being $200 for a case with a full aluminum side panel and foot is uncommon. It seems Trikes is willing to run at a lower margin than its competitors to get some recognition and market share. The case is also semi-modular, allowing the motherboard tray and power supply case to be swapped positionally. It's coming out in Q3. We'll just mention it here, but Trikes also have this really trippy, weird paracord style case. We didn't like this one. Probably a dust nightmare, not great for airflow, definitely strange, but they're trying different things. And then they had some mini ITX cases that we'll kind of skip over for now as well. That's in the full video. Let's end our ATX section with Inwin signature cases. This isn't something that'll be for sale in any kind of volume, or maybe at all, unless you email them and ask for it, but it deserves a mention for being basically an art piece. The new signature case uses a 180-degree bend in a sheet of straight-up glass. It's not even tempered. It's 110 centimeters long, and it's treated with an anti-shatter film and bent around the entire chassis, sort of appearing to interlock with the aluminum. The designers told us that their objective was to artistically represent aluminum and glass embracing, like the Inwin H-Tower of yore though. The new Infinite signature case, this one, opens on a button press and unfolds the motherboard tray out to present it. The case uses a motor to push the enclosure open, with a gigantic aluminum foot to hold everything securely in place without anything tipping. The glass is a feat of manufacturing and requires long cooling cycles to make the shape without shattering. There were a ton of other ATX cases at the show, like MSIs that we briefly showed in another video, but these are some of the most interesting ones that we encountered. The $100 market is definitely exploding, or will be later this year, and the $180 to $220 market will remain popular as well. Those look like the main areas of focus right now for the manufacturer. Let's look at some mini ITX cases. Cooler Master's mini ITX concepts start us off. The unnamed BTF ITX concept case is currently built to enclose the GPU in a cage atop the main body and presented openly. Although shown with the Asus BTF solution to run power into the foot of this particular GPU, Cooler Master intends to optionally punch a hole for the GPU power cable to go up through the chassis. The case uses a locking mechanism to latch the top cage into place. The concept is a relatively fresh take on showcasing a component. We'd like to see some ventilation punched out between the GPU and the floor, and likewise, you'll need to keep an eye on dust in the cart. Still, it's a new take, and we can respect that. Cooler Master also had the favored NR200P, except in a new variant, where the side panel is cut for the GPU. Our viewers pointed out that this is fulfilling the lawn-running meme of cutting cases to fit 4090s because they're just that big now. Both are expected out in the last half of this year, and prices aren't known yet. The Fractal Era 2 case also gets a spot on our ITX list. Fractal had the Mood ITX case, Era 2, the Pi North unofficial product, and an updated North XL with back connect tooling. The Era 2 is where we'll focus for the ITX cases today. We'll reserve the commentary on the fabric-covered Fractal Mood since it's currently in our reviews process. The Era 2 uses wood and aluminum for a $200 price point. Fractal noted that its wood has been treated in a way that should prevent any cracking or damage from use. The Era 2 has a clever mechanical design to allow the exterior chassis to easily lift off after the bottom filter is unseated, making the chassis easy to get into for building or maintenance. The top panel also has some mechanical latches that release for full access inside the case. It's an 18.9 liter case with two 120mm basement fans included, a PCIe Gen 4 riser, and a Terra-style spine that shifts slightly side to side to better accommodate GPU or CPU cooler clearance. As for the wood, it's reinforced underneath to prevent bowing while still filtering air. And just to be clear to bowing, that was bowing, B-O-W, not B-O-E-I-N-G, just so we're 100% clear. Thermaltake gets a mention for its TR1 ITX case, which it intends to design specifically for travel. To truly hit the travel market, we think it needs some screws to lock the panels in place, and definitely a strap or a handle of some kind, but it's still in design phases. Overall, we liked the color combinations and the execution. They're trying to hit the $100 to $120 price point with this. The case isn't final yet, and it'll be expanding in depth, so since it still needs some time to bake, we'll just move on, but it's on the radar at least. The biggest thing Thermaltake did this year was expand their color palette across all their cases, so we're excited to see how that's received beyond the usual black or white solutions. And finally, Antec had an ITX case present as well. The Performance 1M uses a red interior frame and a mixture of aluminum and steel to create back-to-back style ITX builds. From our hands-on with the prototype, the mechanism isn't as refined as the Terra, but we did like the red accent and saw potential in the design. The case fits a 3-slot GPU with adjustable depth to bias towards the CPU or GPU cooler, as with the Terra or other similar cases. Antec is still finalizing this case, but we hope they put the most of their efforts on refining how that spine functions. That's it for our best cases of 2024 so far, Computex Edition video. As always, check back for the reviews of these cases as we get them all in, so we can objectively analyze them and just make sure they function and compete where it seems like they should. We have a ton of case reviews coming out, and we've already published a bunch of standalone videos about all of these cases on the channel, so you can check those out if you want to see more about it. Otherwise, thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersaccess.net to grab one of our brand new PC case badge magnets to support us directly, and we'll see you all next time.
Ugh. I forgot what I was going to say.
Should that be the intro?
Sure. Take your work and gaming experience to the next level with the ViewSonic XG340C 2K ultra-wide high-end display. The XG340C 2K 34-inch 100Hz ultra-wide monitor features HDMI 2.1, AMD FreeSync Premium Pro, a 1000R curved screen, VESA display HDR 400 and 1 millisecond response time for the ultimate immersive gaming experience. And take control of multiple devices with KVM support while also taking full control of your display via the Elite Display Controller. To see the full list of specs and features, follow the sponsored link in the description below. All right, so this is the active backplate of the ABP version of the EEK Vector 2 water blocks. And this is an RTX 4090 Strix card from Asus. So this is actually my best friend's graphics card that's gonna be going into his build that I'm gonna be building for him. I had this block left over from when I couldn't decide for my personal rig that you guys have already seen me do, if I was gonna use the ABP or the non-ABP backplate. Well, I ended up using the non-ABP specifically because of the layout I was choosing. This would not have fit in my motherboard, and I'll show you at the end of this video after it's together why there's certain motherboards this will not work with and you must be aware of. But I've never installed an ABP or active backplate. Essentially, it's two water blocks that sandwich your graphics card. So typically you have a water block that goes in the front, and it attaches to the card, and then you have a backplate that goes on the back side that often acts as like a heat spreader, if you will. It's got thermal pads under there. It touches vital heat points in the back of the graphics card, back of the MOSFETs, VRMs, the core itself, maybe the memory pads, maybe. And then that heat gets transferred to the backplate and just spreads it across, which will soak some of the heat out of the card and help give you cooling on both sides. Remember, heat goes 360 degrees in direction. So if you're super cooling one side of the graphics card,
and you're not super cooling the other, the theory there is that you could have better thermal performance if you were actively cooling both sides. So backplate designs over time have evolved from just being kind of like a support piece to help with bowing of the graphics card to passive cooling, giving you some sort of, like I said, heat dissipation across the piece of the backplate itself, to some of them actually being thinned like a heat sink. And as long as you had air movement over that, then you'd be able to get some sort of cooling. The problem is when people go with high-end water cooling and stuff, they tend to not have active airflow happening around that area of the case because it's all the heat's being taken to the radiators and then exhausted there, and there's not a lot of airflow happening in the middle. So EK came up with this design for this generation, which basically adds a graphics or a water block to both sides. Unfortunately, it also doubles the price of the componentry because at the time of making this video right now on the website, it's $454. So you add $500 to a graphics card that already costs around $2,000 plus, depending on the time of this video, fluctuating prices still. And you have a $2,500 solution, which, to be honest, is still better than the $3,000 people were paying for 3090s during the height of the scalping era. But I digress. It's kind of frustrating as somebody that's a water cooling enthusiast to see a $454 water cooling solution for a graphics card, because the standard water blocks that we were used to seeing from EK for years would run about $115 to $125, depending on the card solution. And it made sense at that time because if it's the highest end card and you're looking to do water cooling, it costs money to manufacture this stuff. $100 to $125 wasn't unreasonable. But now you're adding essentially the price of like a 3070 Ti or a 3070 to a card that's already super expensive. Because of the cost of water cooling these days is why you don't see water blocks for 60 series cards. I see people all the time, they're like, I can't find a water block for my 2060 or my 3060 or my 3060 Ti. It's because it makes no sense to spend $100+ to actively cool with water a mid-range graphics card when realistically you should have taken that extra money and just got a better card. That's what you should have done. So spending money on like something like this on something super top tier is about the only place it makes sense. I think they have this also for a 4080. Personally, to me, that doesn't make sense because you should be spending the $500 on a higher end, either 4080 or just go for broke, literally, and go for a 4090 with that extra cost. Moving on, let's see what we've got inside the box, and then we'll kind of do an installation video like I did with my particular card. And then I do have the EK Waterblock website pulled up on my laptop because all their manuals now are through PDF and QR code, which is kind of nice because then if there is a manual change or a revision, your manual won't be out of date. It'll always be up to date as long as they stay up to date. Jeez, it's like the plastic is negligible, I'm gonna leave it on. 2,243 grams. 5 pounds of water block right here. I have to know now, I don't remember. How much does the 4090 weigh? 2.471. So it weighs almost as much as the card itself. The PCB stops here. So you go from a solution that doesn't fit in many cases to one that would fit in any case with, you know, where the PCB stops. And that's as big as the card will be. This is going to be the size of the card now. You can see the difference, right? And it's still pretty thick. You don't reuse this because the block does tie into this plate. So you use the rear plate that comes with it. You get a few things here. Showed this before. Before I wasn't sure what this was for. I now know this is how you're expected to unplug the 12-volt high power connector because it's recessed in the block. So you're expected to stick this in there and pop it, and then you can pull it out. And then we received, this is just a wrench for turning some of their hex nuts for like their caps. And then we received the tools that we need to actually install the block, which is a couple different size Allens. But I will be using my iFixit kit because this is way easier by having some dexterity of using this rather than using this. So iFixit's highly recommended to have in your toolkit. Yes, they are a sponsor, but you know what? They're a cool ass sponsor to have because how can you argue with tools, right? So these are gonna be all of our thermal pads. Holy cow. If we don't use all of these, but if we did, 126 grams. It's 126 grams of thermal pads. And then you can see you get your 2 caps, which in my opinion, they should have been black because of everything else on here kind of being black, which would be nice. You get some extra, you see those what look like oval O-rings right there? Those are extra O-rings specifically for this top piece right here. So this top piece right here mounts down on both of these blocks. It's essentially just installing 2 water blocks, which is kind of neat. So you see where this is sticking down right here? This is essentially like where the PCB socket is going to be for the PCI Express slot. You can see how much it sticks out both sides. The problem is if you have a graphics or a motherboard that has a heatsink block right there next to the top slot, if it's right up against the socket, it's not gonna fit. So modern motherboards, this is the Maximus Extreme Z790 board, an Intel Asus board, a board I was considering using for my friend, but with all the Asus stuff lately, I'm really highly considering going with a different brand. It only has one 16x PCIe 5 slot. This is a 8x down here, and I don't think it's PCIe Gen 5. I could be wrong, but I don't want to mount it down here for obvious reasons. But you see how this block, which also has the OLED or LCD screen, I don't know if it's OLED or LCD, but anyway, this is a display right here. It's right up against that slot. So it won't, like it will seriously impact that right there. Now you would need a motherboard that doesn't have anything right up against the slot. Let me get a motherboard that it probably will work on. So you can see the spacing now between anything that would interact, which would be this guy right here, because of the fact they pushed this down a little bit on the MSI board. Was this the MSI Edge, whatever it is, another Z790 board, MPG Edge. This is an M.2 slot though. So this would not be a slot you would really want to utilize with a rigid tube build because of the fact that to get to it, if you ever had to maintenance this drive or replace it, you'd have to drain your loop and move your graphics card out of the way. But you can see now, that would clear just fine. See that? There's even some more room there. So keep that in mind. You're either gonna have to go vertical mount and potentially cover something cool. And the vertical mount also is in the way of all of our M.2 drives. So that's a risk we just have to take if we want to use the active backplate. So cooling benefit, I don't know, to be honest. And I'm not gonna be able, I won't know if it cools any better because I don't have, well, I don't have anything to compare it to yet. I have my RTX 4090 in my system at home, but the thing is, unless I put the card in the exact system at home to have the exact same cooling setup so I have a perfect A/B comparison, I'm not sure yet if this is gonna give real tangible results or just be a gimmick. Because sure, I know what the temperatures and stuff look like on this card being air, but I can't compare this to say it really worked. I have to compare this to the non-active backplate block to see if it made any difference at all, or if it's just a cool nice to have because bragging points, I don't know. All right, let's install it. It's always interesting when I have a card that still has plastic on it and I'm taking it apart. This card was intended to be water cooled from day one. This is gonna be my best friend's build. His first super high end, like rigid tubed water cooled system. He is like completely.
Ready to lose something?
Is there a hole in the bag? Oh yeah, there is a hole in the bag in the bottom. EK, WTF, man. Anyways, I started to say it's always interesting taking a graphics card that is like brand new with plastic on it and has actually been fired up like once to test. I'll always test your stuff to make sure it works prior to doing water blocks and stuff. That's just good practice. Okay, so on the Strix card, you have to remove all these screws in the face right here first, which is pretty easy. They're just Phillips screws. I also have a pro tip for you guys when it comes to not losing any of this hardware. If you ever need to send this back for warranty reasons or you sell it, you know, put the cooler back on, put the screws back where they came from. Put those screws back where they came from, or so help me, so help me. Sorry, that was Monster Scene. And by the way, I had this little screwdriver which came with, I think it was an old Asus something or another. Anyway, they fit perfectly with the iFixit bits. iFixit, come on. I think you guys have one in development or something. Let's get it already. So this way you won't lose any of them. There we go. So now those won't be lost. I still think this is one of the easiest cards ever to work on because I need to take these off because they're in the way. I really didn't savor that, did I? So I'm kind of keeping these sort of laid out where they go. Like the smallest, longest screws are around the perimeter of the backplate because I want to put these back in their appropriate spot. That way I'm not mixing up screws. But realistically, it's like a clamshell, taking this card apart. Once you take away all the perimeter screws, then work your way to these 2 screws. After these 2 screws are off, you do the 4 screws around the socket. And that's it. The whole cooler will come off as a single, like the back plate, and then there's a couple of fan wires you have to undo, and that's it. Okay, these screws, these 4 screws right here are under heavy tension because it is a spring that is a backplate retention, so it's intended to have a certain amount of mounting pressure, and that is exactly what this is doing. So I'm gonna start them with the hand one. These screws are captive, by the way, so they're not gonna go flying off the bracket. This is what gives us the mounting tension, and it was something that was needed to be put back on NVIDIA cards with 30 series, whereas AMD's always had it, because of the size of the die. And as you tighten down, it comes down flat. So that's what gives you the retention. So now, just be careful as you pry up from the rear. There are thermal pads on there, which is why it kind of got stuck. As you can see now, that is the size of the PCB. So we do have a couple wires we have to unplug. These are for the RGB and the fans. They're right here and right here. So again, when you go to take this off, double check. If the backplate's off, all your screws are off. But if your backplate won't come off, make sure you check that you're not missing a screw like back here or any in the middle. When we take it off, just leave this cover on the PCB socket right here. That way you're not getting finger oils and stuff all over it. Just leave that on. And then just kind of pry up. It's kind of a scary sound. That's because you're hearing all that thermal paste and the thermal pads, which there's a lot of them, creaking. It's normal. You just gotta kind of, see, that took some force. But don't just yank it off because, no, there's those wires right there. So kind of hinge it away at the back. There's little clips here you have to depress. See, it's got like a little alligator clamp on there. Once you get that one off, you can flip it backwards. Squeeze and release. They're color coded, so they can't be wrong. And there you are. There is your RTX 4090, which if you think about the amount of power and performance that this has and the size that it is, it's pretty impressive. So anyway, there's that. We'll set this aside for a moment, someplace safe, because now we need to put all of this crap back on in the exact reverse order. And this is a rectangle, by the way. It's no longer square. So if it doesn't reach, just rotate it. I'm even leaving the thermal paste just on the cooler right now because I need to get this all back on so we don't lose any of the screws. I used to keep them in a little baggie, taped to the block or the cooler, until I got to the point to where I could not remember where the screws went a year or 2 or 5 later when I would try and go back to air cooling. So now if they're all back in their spot, there's nothing to worry about.
NZXT's build is a quick and easy way to get a new gaming computer. Build a gaming PC on your budget using the built-in configurator and see exactly how your favorite games will perform. Don't want to spec it yourself? Then choose from BLD's pre-configured player PC systems designed to fit your needs and budget. To see the full lineup and specs of the NZXT BLD Player Series pre-built PCs, follow the sponsored link in the description below.
So I had put those screws back in here, which you're not supposed to do when it was still together, only because I forgot. This new bracket is what has to go in there. But I'm gonna go ahead and reuse the black screws because they have a tapered head on this bracket, just like the other one. You can see you got 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, which go right into the DisplayPort / HDMI mount there. Cool. And then you don't have to worry about those screws. So the excess screws are still in the cooler here, here, and here, which is fine because we do not use those on this bracket. So now all of our screws are going to be accounted for. Nothing's going to get lost later when we're trying to put it back together. And you can see it now just looks like a 4090 without a port on the, or a slot sticking out of the bottom, because like Phil said, we were removing the PCB from the cooler, not the other way around. Also too, in that last break, we found out that iFixit does have a motorized screwdriver, and why they haven't sent us one yet is beyond me. So I think everyone needs to go to iFixit's Twitter and be like, yo, why haven't you sent J's 2 cents one of their electric screwdrivers? Considering we have the best ads on the internet for them. 4090 for sale. Don't look at it any other angle.
Hey Jay, how come those RAM chips don't have a thermal pad?
Because some stuck to the cooler and some stuck to the PCB, so I forgot to pull those off the PCB and put them back on the cooler. So anyway, see how there's some still sitting on here and some still sitting on there? Be careful as you pull this off. If they tear, it's actually not the end of the world. But anyway, we want to leave these where they go. just want to be careful. There's lots of stuff sticking up off the PCB, like SMDs and stuff. See how that just tore? It's actually not a problem. It's probably gonna tear because it's pretty stuck. Stick your finger in the thermal paste like I just did. It's like when you wipe too aggressively. Hit like if you've ever wiped too aggressively and you rip a hole in the TP. See, if it tears, it's fine. You can still smoosh it back into a pad, which is perfectly fine.
Which situation?
You don't don't do that with the toilet paper. Just get a new piece.
Shove it back in there.
No, just get a new piece. So the next thing we need to do is clean off any of the residue still on the RAM chips and obviously the thermal paste off of the die. You'll notice there's no RAM chips on the back of the 4090. That was a 3090 thing. So we got 24 gigs of RAM on the front side. I just like to use a blue paper towel, the blue shop towels for this. Be careful, don't go wiping again because all that stuff on the surface. They're pretty well attached. It takes a lot to get them to break off. I've tried in the past actually, and it's harder than you would think. You don't have to worry about getting all the stuff off of the side around the die. You can if you want to be super anal about it. That is completely non-conductive. As long as what is touching the actual die itself is all clean, like the top surface, that's all you really need to worry about right there. Not to mention when you put on the new thermal paste, it's gonna squish out anyway. And I won't be using the thermal paste that EK provides. I pretty much exclusively use KPX or Cryonaut Extreme because in my opinion, they're the best thermal paste on the market. So get it nice and clean. Don't gotta get super anal, but you need to get this residue off of the RAM chips. And isopropyl alcohol is gonna be the best thing for that. You can see it wants to sort of stick around. That's okay, you're gonna have some residue left over. It's okay if the alcohol gets in other places on the PCB. It isn't gonna hurt anything. If you don't get all this off and it stays kind of oily, what you'll find is that the thermal pads you need to install won't stick, and then it'll start to become super annoying. Obviously, as you can see, the paper towel is sort of tearing apart and leaving little fibers on there. I'll show you the next step that I like to do to make sure that I get all those fibers off. So you can see I obviously have little fibers and stuff sitting on top of the die right here, which is bad. So if that got sandwiched between the cooler and whatnot, that would affect cooling. We've got some right there on the PCB. So I just like to take one of these detailing brushes and just kind of spritz the whole board. And let this get in there. That'll help clean out any of the thermal paste that got stuck in any of the crevices or the crevasses between the chips. Cool. Now we can install price. So for now, we can set the PCB kind of out of the way, someplace soft. I'm using a J2Sense gaming mat, which by the way is only about a month from being back in stock with a new design. So make sure you guys are checking out j2sense.com for that. Or make sure you're subscribed here because I'll obviously be mentioning it when it's back in stock. So we need to get this sucker apart. And this is where I'm now kind of consulting the manual here, and it shows that we have to remove these M3x10 screws that are on the perimeter, which one's the back? So this is the back plate. That one, that one, that one, that one, and that one. Are they captive? They're captive, yay! I know they were captive on the new back plates, which is awesome because then you don't have to go trying to fumble around with it to get them to line up when you go to install it. So you can see the little neodymium, whatever they're called, magnets in there. I put it in the middle, and then I just tilted it. Oh, it's so strong. Dang it! I had it. Oh, I had it. There we go. The little tiny magnets that it has in there, those are strong. Those are really strong magnets. So now we can get to these screws right here, which we could use their wrench on, just because I'm kind of lazy at the moment. So now we should be able to just this is why you always double check if something won't come apart before you start yanking. I missed a screw, so now, yeah, look at that. Maybe they're not captive. So here is basically where the PCB is going to go. This guy will just come off after we remove these screws. See how they're kind of like a standoff with a screw in it? It's like a really big version of how the 20 series RTX cards are put together. It's the bigger threaded version of it, which is kind of nice. So there we go. There's our RTX 4090 block. There's the other block. So you can see it realistically is just 2 water blocks. The PCB needs to be prepped now in terms of having all the thermal pads installed. Now there's 3 sizes here. You're gonna have a 1 millimeter, a 1.5 millimeter, and a 2 millimeter. And the colors are represented on the PCB with the color. So it looks like on the front side, all 1 millimeter. You can see the 1.5 and the 2 millimeters are going on the back. And it looks like what we're actively cooling here is the backside of the VRMs and the MOSFETs. They give you extra, and you really want to be careful not to have to use the extra, otherwise you're going to find yourself potentially running out. We're going to be using the 1 mil on all the all the RAM chips, and they're already about the right width for the RAM, as you can see. So I'm not going to trim them width-wise, but I'll show you a neat little trick that I like to do. The blue side is a really thin film. The light blue side has a thicker plastic backing. If you take the darker blue side, you just set it down where you need it, and push on it, you get an imprint of where you can cut it. So now that I've got my line, I'm just gonna take my scissors and snip. There we go. So now you can see it's the right size for that. So I'm gonna take off the light blue backing, apply it to our RAM. And if we did not clean these with alcohol, like we already did, then it might not stick. If it doesn't stick, clean it with alcohol again, and then it should stick. Before I do the rest of the RAM chips, because you saw how I did that, let's talk about what else we have to cool, which is the top of the chokes right here, and then the VRMs for both the core power delivery and the memory power delivery. If you guys aren't aware, this right here is for the core, this up front is for the memory. So we know the length on this is a little bit too long, but we also know it's too wide to stick down in there. And we just need to cool the actual squares that are sticking up, not the capacitor, or not the capacitor, but the resistors next to it. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the length where I need it, right there. But I also know if I cut this pad perfectly in half, then what I'll be able to do is just use one pad for both of it. So I'm gonna go ahead and, so this pad is exactly 1.5 centimeters wide. And the reason why I'm going through all this is as somebody that has screwed up and had to go find pads from another kit, which most people don't have laying around, I want to get this right the first time. So with the plastic backing part on the bottom, which means the light blue facing down, I can just lightly score with the razor blade along it. Check that out. I now have 2 pads that are of appropriate length to just lay down inside of the gap. Just like that. Now this one is already ready for the other side because we had 2 identical lengths of MOSFETs that we were going to cool right there. Okay. Easy. So there's those 2. And we can do the exact same thing with the chokes. The difference is the chokes are a little bit wider, and we do want to try and cover all of the choke material. So I'm just going to make my indentation. I don't know if you can see it, but I can see a perfect outline of where I need to cut. I'm going to use my razor blade to do that. So here is all of our thermal pads installed. You see some of them are a little more squished than others. That's fine. The backing on these, I hate these thermal pads from EK with a passion, and they have been using these for years. And you know what? I feel like for what you're paying, they should be pre-cut. I honestly feel like they should be pre-cut. And this is just laziness on EK's part, because brands that have water blocks that cost hundreds of dollars less come with pre-cut and even pre-installed thermal pads. Even the Corsair water blocks. Corsair water blocks come with pre-installed thermal pads, exactly cut, probably machine placed, because they're like perfect everywhere they should go. So when you're paying $454 or even $280 or whatever the single non-active backplate costs, these should be pre-cut. I hate them because when you go to pull them off, you see how there's a line right here? Like when I went to pull the backing off, it tore. So of course I had to cut a seam right in between 2 of the chokes and then continue with another one. And then they stretch, and trying to get it to come off cleanly with the razor blade because they don't want to unstick. It's just, they're terrible. I hate these pads with a passion. And I'm gonna probably go on a crusade now to basically just talk crap about EK's thermal pads as long as they're using them, because they are quite honestly the worst. I'm gonna go ahead and change up the installation here on something a little bit. They show installing an X pattern for the thermal paste. I don't do that. I pre-spread, and that's only because of the fact that I now know if I pre-spread the thermal paste that I will have full coverage on the die. I have had issues in the past with my own installations and not being careful with having a portion of the die become exposed. And then what that leads to is a hotspot temp on the die that leads to thermal throttling of the graphics card that you don't notice, because the overall like graphics card temperature will look fine on the edge temp, but you have a hotspot temp that is causing you to lose frequency. And it looks perfectly fine when you look at it like MSI Afterburner and stuff. It's not until you get into like GPU-Z or something, we start monitoring hotspot, and you're like, whoa, why do I have an edge temp of 48C and a hotspot of 95? So that will happen if you don't have full coverage on the die. I find the X sometimes does not spread perfectly. So that's how I do it right there, just like frosting the cake. It will still spread out a little bit, and I'm perfectly fine with that. So the next thing we have to do, it says, is put on the bracket, which I already did. Does that have me putting the bracket on the... This is what happens when you get ahead of yourself. The bracket goes on the block. This should be a lesson in RTFM. Okay, so now that I've got the plate on where it goes, these two screws line up with those. Okay, now is probably a better time to use a box or something, which the cooler box will work very well. That way I can hang it over the side, because see how you've got that hanging down? So I can put this on there flat like that. Make sure this is all lined up. Boom. Just like that. And then I use the screws that are included with holding them down. Use the manual to see exactly which holes to use. If you can't really tell, you can blow it up. So I'm gonna put these all in there now where they go and move on. All right, so I got all my screws on there. A little tip, do your initial installation of the screws and then let it kind of sit for a minute. And then you can come and start to give it just a little bit more turns, and you'll find that you can probably get another half turn over time, because what you're dealing with is the thermal pad squishing. As the thermal pads squish, you'll lose some of that tension on the back plate, or the block itself. You don't want that. So I'll let it sit for a while, I'll kind of push on it, and then you'll find that you can give it some more tension. But you should only be using like fingertip tension, because you can easily, these are very fine threads. You can strip these out. You definitely don't want to deal with that. But look, I'm only making like a 30 seconds of a turn, but that's it. Now we've got really good tension on there, but you'll find if you let it sit for a while after you do the initial tension, you'll come and you'll be able to turn it again pretty easily. And that's, again, the thermal pad is squishing. So the next thing it wants us to do now is put in these screws that I did not put screws in, because they give you a very detailed marker of which screws go in with screws versus these standoffs. So now I'll put these standoffs in there. And that black spudger tool that they provided is also designed to be used as a tool for this. I'm gonna go ahead and use my iFixit one, because I like it better. Okay, so the standoffs are designed to give you something to obviously mount this guy to, right? So they're gonna line up with those standoffs. But we obviously need to do our thermal pads on here first, so we can set aside the 1 mils that we were using, and we'll use basically the exact same technique as I already mentioned for doing the 1.5 mils and the 2 mils. So the red represents the 1.5, the blue represents the 2 mil. This will be a lot easier because we don't have to be super precise, because as you can see, the back of the PCB is pretty flat. So these are the 2 mils, these super thick dudes, and these are the 1.5. So I'm gonna start with just getting one right here on the back of the core, and that's gonna come in handy because the back of the core definitely has heat that comes out of it. It's just interesting because I'm really wondering how effective this is, because we are now dealing with thick thermal pads transferring heat to the block rather than thermal paste. So I think it's gonna have to obviously work to some degree. Otherwise, why do it? The only other two places we have thermal pads that need to go are right here and right here. These two rows of resistors. And that makes sense because resistors obviously generate a lot of heat because they're stepping down the voltage. We'll come back once all the thermal pads are on. We're getting to the end here. This is definitely a lot more involved than the non-active backplate, because the active backplate doesn't have, or the passive backplate doesn't have nearly as many steps. It's like, it would have been done already. So now I'm gonna take this guy and I'm going to line it up. So because of the O-rings right there, we do not want to slide them out. So I'm gonna kind of go out a little too far and then come back, if that makes sense. Like that. Boom. And then we just use the same screws, the long ones, or not the long ones, but these little guys right here. And I just want to get 1 or 2 of them started. Okay, now I'm gonna go to the opposite corner over here. Because what I want to do right now is I want to get the terminal mounted down. So now that I have that on there securely so it won't fall off, I'm going to push these 3 down in there. Probably is not going to be super easy. I guess I'll have to do this last because of the fact that until the back plates are squished together, it's probably not going to have the right gap on there. So I'm going to finish putting these in there. Because it does in the manual show putting these screws in first, then doing the terminal. So what you're going to notice here is because of the thickness of the thermal pads, the holes are going to probably be like this, right? Not perfectly lined up. So what I did is I just used the box. You could use the edge of a table or something. I just leaned some weight on it to squish the pads. Got the center one to start to thread. And then once I did that, the other ones will, yeah, see, no effort really needed at all to get those to line up. And then you do not, once again, do not want to over tighten these. The O-ring is doing the seal. As long as there's pressure on the O-ring, you'll be fine. Go until the threads stop, and then stop. This guy, back another right way. Now we just need to clean it up. It's now installed. What is the total weight? I'm so curious. 2,610 grams. I gained 200 grams over the weight of the air cooler. But you know what though? It's neat. I definitely need to clean it up right now. The issue, like I said, so basically this is like a series water block. And the way the fittings need to go now is just like as if it was a single terminal. You need to have an inlet or an outlet, doesn't really matter. And it also doesn't matter if it enters into the backplate block or the GPU block first. It truly doesn't matter. All that matters is that you need to have it going in one side and out the other. So if I came in here, it has to exit here, and vice versa. If I came in there, it needs to exit there. This is, I think my friend's really gonna enjoy this card, obviously, because RTX 4090, who wouldn't? There's our plug coming out the bottom. You can see, obviously, making sure I took it out before I had mounted up the card, or that could have been a problem. But there we go. Everything is installed. Nothing seemed to be a problem. Nothing's squishing out anywhere it shouldn't. It's just heavy. So talking about sag, if it's mounted horizontally, it'll probably sag quite a bit just due to the weight. Anti-sag bracket would be important to consider. So anyway, there you go. What I'll probably do is because of the amount of radiator space, and I have to clean this up too, this hand oil's all over it now. Because of the fact that I'm gonna be installing similar radiator setup in my friend's system to my system in my Inwin 928, it will not be a like A-B perfect comparison because I would have had to have used the same 2 different cards in the same rig to compare any sort of a temperature difference. I am going to monitor temperatures on this when I build that system and compare them to what I'm experiencing at home and then normalize it for normalized room temperature, because room temperature is a direct one-to-one scale with the temperature of your components because of the air that's cooling the loop. We talk about that later. People like to argue about that all the time. The science doesn't really care about the opinions. It's facts that it cares about. And if your room goes up 1C, your loop and your components also go up 1C. It works that way. Anyway, moving on, there you go. This is a completely, is frugal the right word? When you just arbitrarily spend? No, frugal is when you're opposite. Okay, this is a frivolous, that's the other word. This is a frivolous expenditure. This is absolutely unnecessary, but it's cool. And I like cool, no pun intended. And it's not even mine, so I can't wait to check it out. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I'll put links down below to both the iFixit stuff. Also, too, a little plug here. EK didn't ask me to do this, but I'm gonna do it anyway. They still have 50% off the price of 30 series water blocks. So if you have a 3080 or a 3090 or 3080 Ti or whatever that you've been thinking about water cooling, getting an EK vector block for half off, that's a deal. Because even if it was $180 or whatever they're going for, somewhere around there, it's just an arbitrary number I threw out there, getting it for like 90 bucks would be a steal in terms of the water blocks. So if you're considering doing this, you got a 30 series card, now might be the time before they're all out of stock. So once they're gone, they're gone. All right, guys, thanks for watching. And as always, we'll see you in the next one. All right, Skunkworks build continuation. J-Log. Stardate 2023. The Kraken Series AIOs from NZXT come in many shapes and sizes to fit your CPU needs. The Kraken Elite Series RGB coolers feature a 2.36-inch 640 by 640 customizable LCD screen, showing system info or custom GIFs and images for a custom look, as well as the F-Series RGB fans and a single breakout cable for a simplified installation. If low-key is more your thing, then the Kraken Elite Series also comes in black and non-RGB edition, while retaining the amazing pump screen, and NZXT is now enabling animated GIF functionality on all base model non-Elite Krakens. To see the full lineup of the new Kraken and Kraken Elite coolers from NZXT, follow the link in the description below. So if you are not aware, I'm reviving Skunkworks. I've already done a part 1 where I completely disassembled not the system, but the case, and deep cleaned and painted parts of it and stuff. In fact, let me get that up on the table here because we got to do some test fittings and some stuff. I got my... You guys remember that really expensive order I placed with Performance PCs? We're gonna play around with that $819 water block today too, but let's unbox this, let's take a look. Ironically, I placed another order for the radiator that they didn't have in stock. So I had the thick boy, and then this one, because I'm still concerned about whether or not the size will fit. So I've got this as well. I've also put in an order for the front rad, the 360, that I have not been able to make up my mind if I'm going to use or not, mostly because I want the option. If I don't use it there, I'll use it somewhere else. It's pretty obvious. So if you guys aren't aware, Performance PCs, performance-pcs.com, I'm giving them a huge shout out. They have supported my water cooling builds for years. So I definitely want to give credit where credit is due, because these guys, look, you're not going to find another place, and they're not sponsoring this message or anything. You will not find another store on the planet like Titan Rig. I love you, but even you guys don't carry nearly the quantity that Hank does over at Performance PCs. So check them out if you guys are looking for water cooling